All right, YouTube. Some of you probably already know this, but the date predicted for the beginning of the Norse Ragnarok, the Norse apocalypse, is February 2nd, February 22nd of 2014. They've already sounded the horn of York. The Nordic individuals in Britain, that is, have sounded their horn, warning of the impending doomsday coming upon us all that's supposed to happen about 48 hours from now. As I said with the Mayan doomsday material, I pointed this out early and often, and I wish more people had understood it at the time, is that these ancient prophecies, the Mayans, the Norse, whatever other prophecies you might be referring to, are not the same as the kind of quote unquote prophecies that people make today. When you get some televangelist or stump preacher or radical cleric or something predicting that the end will come soon, most often they give a fairly soon to happen and very explicit date. Like the world will end on, Harold Camping style, the world will end on June 6th of 1966 because it's 6666, or something like that. These don't ever come around because all these people, what they are predicting is simply the world will end in fire, Jesus will come back, we'll all ascend. This is the end. It'll happen in a 24-hour period, sometimes less. It'll happen instantly. It'll happen over the course of a week. The world will be ended. It'll be depopulated. Everyone dies. Hallelujah. The ancient prophecies, and if you've ever read the prophecies of Ragnarok or any of the Mayan materials that relate to their end times, most often, they regard the end as the end of a cycle. The Mayans did this explicitly. The Norse do the same thing. But if you listen to the entire prophecy, humankind does survive. There are 3 years of winter, which could be a metaphor in itself. It could be a metaphor for suffering in general. The world devolves into chaos. People forget the gods. People forget virtue. People forget morality. They become like animals and they kill one another off. And there are various famines and plagues and things, which would naturally follow an extended period of chaos in any region anyway, because then medical system breaks down, education breaks down, law and order break down. So that's fairly clear that in that case, the Norse, at least on that point, would be right. The Norse aren't saying the world ends, it frosts over like a tomb, everything becomes ice and snow forever, and then the cosmos collapse and turn to ash or something. They're saying, if you read the prophecy, that the world as it is now ends, that something triggers this 3-year period of winter and or misery, if you're taking it more as a metaphor. And they say that Frey and Freya, this couple, this one man, one woman, survive and repopulate. Again, most likely a metaphor, as of course we know that the likelihood of the human race surviving from a single breeding pair is fairly unlikely. Unless they had perfect genetic health, it simply wouldn't be tenable. The mutations that would likely seep in would destroy the population after a while. They'd be severely inbred. More likely, what it's referring to is a metaphor essentially like this. There will be a 3-year period or thereabouts of intense misery. May not even have anything to do with cold weather, by the way, although it could. After which most of the world's human population will have succumbed to famine, war, disease, pestilence, and so forth. And after this period, small founding groups of people scattered around the world or in a specific region that happen to be protected for some reason survive and thrive and repopulate the world. And they go back to the way things were in the pagan times, appreciating sexuality rather than condemning it like the Christians or Muslims do, appreciating nature rather than simply destroying it and manipulating it for their own gain, enjoying their lives, delving into the pagan sort of bohemian pastoralist world, essentially. And the Mayans predicted, by the way, essentially the same thing. The Mayan doomsday prediction, as I pointed out, was never about on this day the world stops turning, everything crumbles, and all humans die. It is about a cycle. It's the end of a cycle and the beginning. They had cycles within cycles within cycles in their calendar. They were very meticulous. They had at least 5 different incremental periods of time, each with their own meaning, overlapping in tens of thousands of possible combinations, all adding up to this long count, this Baktun period, which of course ended this last December, not December of 2012, because the cycle, the smaller count, still had to go around one full 360-day rotation. So December 21st, 2012 wasn't even the actual end date of this particular cycle. It was just the end of that one Baktun that hadn't quite switched over yet because of the way the calendar aligns. And they would have needed to do even more incredible mathematics to make it line up on that specific date with the counts that they were using. Ragnarok, if this turns out to be true, I can think of several things that could trigger a very literal 3-year winter. One would be some sort of nuclear conflict that involves the world unleashing its nuclear arms. If you look at the Ukraine, that's kind of a touchy point between Russia and the United States, and I'm sure that's going to worry some individuals. Is it likely? No, but it is possible, of course, that something like that, it could even be accidental. It could be that some terrorist group unleashes an EMP, someone thinks they're being nuked, and all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. Another thing could be one of these supervolcanoes. There's a report now today that methane is slowly seeping out of the Yellowstone caldera, which should concern people because the release of methane and all of these other materials can premeditate an eruption in a volcanic zone, or premeditate an earthquake that could cause an eruption, or preclude an eruption. That could very well cause a 3-year winter, essentially. Climate change. Whether you subscribe to climate change as man-made or the result of solar periods or any of these other things, that could result in 3 years of extreme misery for the Earth as large swaths of its surface become colder, others get drier. Of course, California's got that mega drought going on right now. Places are in deep freeze. Europe is being flooded. There's an allusion to the coasts being flooded right in the prophecy of Ragnarok. The Midgard serpent pulls in the tides and floods the earth, essentially, as part of this prophecy. So there are different ways that this would come literally and physically true. Then you can look at it as a metaphor, and you can say 3 years of general misery and suffering that depopulate a large proportion of the Earth's population. Right now, we are seeing a lot of instability in the world. The Cold War, and I've told people this, and they're oblivious to this fact. People think the Cold War ended when the Soviet Union collapsed, or shortly there and after the Berlin Wall came down. And they're wrong. The Cold War never went anywhere. It's still raging to this day. Geopolitical movements between essentially Russia and its closer allies, the United States and its closer allies. Now you've sort of got the EU. It's sort of on the side of the United States, but sort of looks out for itself. You've got China growing in power, which kind of sides with the Russians, at least diplomatically, but also is nationalist and doesn't really like the Russians or anybody else, and also trades heavily with the United States while hating us too. You've got the rise of India as at least a regional power in that location. You've got Brazil building its own economy in BRICS and trying to also improve its own standing and looking towards the possibility of nuclear power that could be used to develop weapons. As the natural result of its need for more and more energy. You've got an unstable situation in the world right now, where all of these countries that for about a decade there was really, during the 1990s, other than in the Yugoslavian region, you didn't have the level of competition and greed and war that you're seeing now. So, shortly after 9/11, which you can believe whatever you want to believe about why it happened and who's responsible, shortly after that, things started to unravel. Because the United States is trying to topple like Assad, Saddam, and other people in that region to solidify its power. Putin obviously doesn't want to give up the Ukraine. I've already given the reasons why. Essentially, Putin is lost without their natural gas and their grain. Venezuela is on the cusp right now with massive, massive student protests going on that almost dwarf the ones you're seeing in Ukraine, and make the ones in Brazil or Turkey look tame by comparison. Turkey is another example. Right now, yesterday, there were protests in Istanbul. There were protests in Ankara. And people, it's beginning to look a bit like that area might destabilize, at least in those urban regions. Brazil, you've still got protests going on. There are protests going on in Bosnia continuously because of the mismanagement of their government. Thailand, Bangkok is being repulsed by protests right now. The reason you're not hearing about most of these other things is because Ukraine is the largest or the most violent protest. And also because our own media over here is an outlet of the government and wants you to focus on Ukraine because it's the most important country to remove from the Russian sphere. Without Ukraine, Russia, if we put anti-missile systems into the Ukraine, Putin's lost even worse. What you could see is a situation where Russia is surrounded by countries that are hosting U.S. Missile interceptor systems, which would essentially mean Russia's nukes are no longer worth anything, and Russia loses. Literally loses the Cold War because of its failure to innovate similar systems and surround its own foes with those same anti-missile systems. It's like if you're playing Age, I hate to make a kind of geeky reference, but if you're playing Age of Empires and you've got an enemy that is cloistered on an island, with not a lot of allies, maybe not a huge economy, but you don't really want to invade, you can always send in groups of villagers and build a bunch of towers on the outside of their island. It keeps them from using their coast. It keeps them from building anything there, and they will mow down any soldiers that they send to those regions because you've just got lines and lines of towers. It prevents them from doing anything. You can then use the map at your leisure. It's a tactic that I've used when I had my geeky Age of Empire days too. That's kind of what we're doing to Russia right now. We're trying to brick them in with their anti-missile systems in Canada. There are anti-missile systems throughout the United States, obviously. In Asia, in Japan and Korea and so forth. There are such systems in Turkey and parts of Europe. We're beginning to box them in. If we built a foundation in the Ukraine and we were to move such systems into, for say India and Pakistan, which are at least marginal allies of ours, trading partners certainly, Russia would not be able to use its nuclear weapons. It would lose. You could literally invade Russia and there's nothing they could do about it except nuke themselves and fire everything at once, which would cause a cataclysmic nuclear fallout and a nuclear winter. But I'm digressing completely here. The prophecy of Ragnarok does not indicate that in 2 days' time, all of a sudden, you start getting feet and feet of snow and everyone freezes to death. It's not what it means. What it means is there will be instability, various problems in depopulation on a scale we haven't seen before, which would mean we'd need another world war or an extended period of world famine that causes a lot of people to starve. There'd be disease and various ills plaguing society. Right now, you can probably see behind me, there's about 3 feet of snow out there. Of course, this is Vermont, so that's fairly normal, not to worry anyone. We've always got Ragnarok up here, by the way, because we've got winter, essentially, that lasts from late October through early April. So we don't care how much snow and cold and misery there is up here. We'll be fine because we've got snow shovels. You people down in the south are the ones that have to worry about that. But no. For those that are worried, oh, the world's going to end in 2 days. No, it's not going to end in 2 days, most likely. Most likely what this is a metaphor referring to cycles. Ancient people in occult mystic paths understood that existence moved in cycles. They looked at the natural world around them. They looked at the seasons. They looked at eclipses. They looked at stellar movements, various cosmic movements. They looked at the way in which plants you plant it, it grows, it dies, the seed goes back to the ground and grows again on a seasonal cycle. Everything that we know and all of our existence is based off of these weather and climate and cosmic cycles. That's what our entire existence is based off of. We can't help but notice these things, and our own actions, our own human actions, can't do anything other than follow those cycles. It's winter, it's cold out. You dress warmer, you stay inside more. It's summer, it's warmer out. You go outside with fewer clothes, you do more things outside. Well, that's a human behavior that's affected by these completely natural cycles that are out of our hands. Unless you subscribe to 100% man-made climate change theory. I do not. I choose to believe that human activity is partially to blame for climate instability and that the rest of it, the majority of it's the result of solar cycles. Again, a natural cycle affecting the way in which this world exists. But you could very well see a 3-year solar minimum that causes much colder temperatures. You could very well see a huge volcanic eruption that blankets the world with ash for years. You could potentially see in the future a nuclear war that causes the same thing, a nuclear winter. Ash and dust and particles go up in the sky and everything's 10 degrees colder year-round for 2 or 3 years. It could happen. I don't think that that's likely, but it is possible. However, the prophecy itself is not a cataclysm. It's not even really, when you think about it, it's not truly a prophecy about the end of the world. It's a prophecy about the end of a cycle. It's the same as Kali Yuga, the cycles of the Buddhists or Hindus, or those groups. It's the same as the Mayan calendar. It's the same as the cycles that you see talked about to some degree, weather cycles and so forth, in the Bible. And certainly in a great deal of occult literature. You even have demons and angels and so forth that are aligned with specific seasons, lunar phases, solar phases, times of year, certain numbers, numerics. It's all thrown in there together. It's all about these cycles that ancient man understood and could base predictions around about weather, around this time of year, it's warmer. We don't know why necessarily. We know it has something to do with the sun. We're not exactly sure why, but we know that it happens with regularity. We can predict, at least to a limited degree, the future based on that. New so-called prophecies do not do that. That's why when I hear a Harold Camping or whatever say the world will end on this day, Jesus will come back, or Ali will come back, or Muhammad will descend, or any of these other things, I know they're not true. I know for a fact that they're not true. They're not actually mystic prophecies. They're just vague. They're just stupid predictions that are being made, usually by people who want to sell a book, or vials of water from a spring in Jerusalem, or copies of the Quran in English or something. That's all they are. They're money-making gigs. The ancient prophecies weren't. They were deliberately metaphorical. They deliberately referred to these cycles that are predictable, and it is possible that in the ancient past, of course, I'm one of the people who studied just enough about archaeology to know that archaeology, at least in the mainstream sense, is often wrong. It is possible that human existence goes back far enough to where they have seen events like we see listed in the Mayan calendar and Ragnarok and so forth happen with regularity. Die-offs or whatever, cataclysms, things that we would consider very negative. It's possible they've already experienced that and they understand that it happens on a periodic basis. It is funny that so many different prophetic statements from antiquity seem to coincide with the period 2012, shortly in the past, on a human scale anyway, to roughly where we are now, into the middle of this year, and into 2016, I should say, because of the blood moon tetrad sort of Kabbalist stuff that people are talking about. Yitzhak Kaduri prophecy, the blue Kachina, the Mayans, the Ragnarok, time wave 0, the joy of Satan. Folks are still waiting for reptilian Enki to come back. All of these things could literally be talking about the same or similar events around the same time period, and people just don't know because all of these are based on ancient lore. They're not based on what we consider modern, logical, scientific, linear thought. They're based on cyclical thought, which is why the ancient world was different from what it is now. Yes, technology was remarkably less advanced than what we have now. However, culture persisted much as it does now. All of these things that we take for granted, philosophy and logic and so forth, they date to ancient times. They were already invented back then. So as far as Ragnarok goes, yeah, it could very well herald a cataclysm of some sort. Or it could just herald completely metaphoric things that most people might not even understand because they think in a linear manner. They don't think about cycles. They don't look at the world and think of it in terms of repeating cycles, sometimes overlapping each other in multiple layers and thus giving the illusion of things constantly changing when they're actually just operating in extended cycles that may overlap for 100,000 years. they think in a linear basis. They think today is not yesterday, it'll never happen again. That's the way people think now. So that's about all. Just thought I'd cover that before the Ragnarok date hits so that people hopefully don't worry too much. Peace out.